And I'm basically getting a lot of information about how to live from a specific set of dudes. And I realized like there are this class of dudes, usually Gen X. So we're talking like mid 40s into 50s, dudes who are telling me, millennials and Gen Z, how to live. Huberman is probably like king of the protocol daddies. And he uses the word protocol. He says, here are the
Yes.
protocols to live by. And they work and they're great. I don't think presidents have as much power as some of these protocol daddies do when it comes to actually saying, here's a lifestyle, here's an identity, go forth and try it out. And people are doing it and it's changing their lives.
This is a great conversation I had with Johnny Bowman. He was previously the CEO of Upward Farms, and he co-leads the Brooklyn chapter of All Kings, which is a men's group for formerly incarcerated men. I first heard about him through a Google document that he created, and it was centered around physical health. The 80-20 of how to get into peak physical shape, but centered around the concept of longevity. I found this document super helpful. I was going through a lot of that research myself, and it had very practical steps of how to reduce a lot of the risks. So I reached out to him to see if he wanted to come onto the podcast to talk about everything related to physical health. But on that initial call, I realized he was way more passionate about manhood, men's groups, emotional intelligence, mental health, and all these topics that I would say sit hand in hand with physical health. So I invited him. We talked about all those topics. We talk about everything from the right fiber intake per day to different role models for men, how shame affects a lot of young men in today's society, the role of men's groups. And we covered a lot of topics. We went down a lot of rabbit holes. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope you do too. So here's the episode. I'm happy to have Johnny Bowman. And I guess I first met you, or I first heard about you from that physical health doc that you wrote. And I remember I was talking to Justin Mayers about all these health tests that I was taking and getting his advice. He's like, dude, you got to read this document. Forwarded it along to me. I was like, dude, this is great. This is like the cliff notes for everything I'm supposed to do with my health. So I think that's how we originally got introduced. But kind of curious, like, what motivated you to create that? And has that document gone viral? Like, has a lot of people hit you up that have read it? And I'm just kind of curious.
So no one hasn't gone viral. I think you are the only one who's seen it outside of like friends and family, basically. And then you've sent it out, and so now it's getting some traffic. But no, I made that for myself about a little over a year ago, and basically I had left my job, had all this time on my hands, and was just mainlining Huberman, Peter Attia, and Lane Norton, just night and day for a while. And my goal was to improve my own health. It had never really been a focus. My father had passed away, and that got me really self-conscious about my own heart health. And I realized I knew nothing, that the doctors who had told me I was doing fine just had a very low standard for what health looked like. And 300 hours of Huberman Lab later, I was like, this is too much information to just keep in my head. And so let's make a nifty Google Doc out of it. And so that's all it is. It's just a summary of all those things.
I found it super helpful. I remember you writing about, like, if you score high here, focus on lowering your APOB and do these things. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on doing those things, like exercise, eating healthy.
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious how many scans there are, how poor your health might be, how many different ways to find out that I'm not, doing
Yeah.
great. And then how few the answers really are for just making sure that you're in A+ health. It's yeah, I mean, you can distill it in like 4 or 5 simple
Yeah.
steps.
What are those 4 or 5 things?
So one is get sleep, 7 to 8 hours. 2, exercise at least 5. I think they mostly go for 6 days a week, split between cardio and strength training. 3 is make sure that you are eating enough fiber and protein. I think the stated goal for fiber is like 35 to 50 grams a day, which is a lot,
It's a lot.
and like way more than most of us are doing for sure. And then a gram of protein per pound of body weight, which is also like an inhuman amount of protein to eat.
Super hard.
Yeah,
So
unless you're mainlining whey protein, it's not easy to do. Uh, and so, and then like whatever alcohol you're drinking, drink less. Uh,
yeah.
that also was like a big one for me, where I was like, okay, this is I'm maybe trying I should cut this out by like, 2/3 at least,
Yeah.
because it's more than 7 drinks a week, or 2 drinks a week, depending on who you talk to, yeah, it does long-term damage because it's poison. And so, um, those are sleeping, eating, exercise are the main things, and no matter when you're talking about your brain, your heart, your ability to be a capable person, generally speaking, when you're 80 years old, it comes down to those things.
It's always the simple things that take a lot of work is usually the answer, and most people want the shortcuts. Uh,
Yeah.
there's definitely a complex version of doing this, but at its base, it's staying consistent with those things. The thing that stood out to me was fiber. So I never because I heard about protein. Yeah, we do 0.7 to 1 per pound has, benefits for muscle and longevity. But the fiber thing was pretty interesting to me because I went to Costa Rica this summer, and Costa Rica, I think, has the best fruit. I mean, there's just fruit everywhere. And I definitely feel like I hit 50 grams a day. I mean, I wasn't counting it, but I left that trip thinking I was like eating horribly because I was just eating whatever I wanted. And I just remember just like literally pooping all the time. And when I got home, I weighed myself. I was like, I definitely gained weight on this trip. I
Mhm.
100%. I came back. I was like, oh, I lost a lot of weight. It's so weird.
Yeah,
And I started thinking, I was like, what did I eat? And I was like, oh my gosh, I must have eaten like half of my meals every day was fruit.
and I'm so surprised it's not the biggest deal when it comes to nutrition. Like, there's a lot all these diets, obviously, that get popularized, and we've certainly learned a lot, um, but there's this one study that I found out about listening to, Dr. Lane Norton about nutrition, which was for every 10 grams of fiber additionally that you eat a day, you have a 10% lower risk of dying, just full stop, which is like, that's the magic bullet. There are no magic bullets except for kind of that one when it
Yeah.
comes to, what we eat and its impact on death. And so, the fact that we are getting maybe half, probably less of the amount of fiber we should be eating a day because so much of food is processed, which takes
Yeah.
all the fiber out. It's to me that's probably the biggest change I've done, and when immediately rectified my diet to eat that amount of fiber, I was it was a weird poop situation for like a week because my body was not used to that. You got to go slow and steady on that front.
All right. So I'm not going to ask follow questions about that. I don't think the listeners would want to listen to, but how do you hit 50 grams of fiber a day? That's a lot. That's a lot.
I mean, here's how I do it. It's everyone should figure it out for themselves,
Yeah.
but one, like, I love bread, and, I can never
Same.
take it out of my diet, but most bread is really poor in fiber despite it
Yes.
being, grains, and so finding a source of bread that is high in fiber was a big one for me. There's a specific type of German bread. I think the brand is called Menstermacher. It's, like, really flat and dense, and it's got 9 grams per slice, and it's like, it's an incredible source of fiber, so eat that. Um, Avocados, weirdly great for fiber. Try to eat one of those a day. And then, leafy greens and vegetables, what most people do. It's, yeah, I mean, Whole Foods generally will get you, I think, 2/3 of the way there, and then I do supplement. So, I do add like, at least 10 grams once, maybe twice a day, to a smoothie,
Yeah.
and, yeah, that's one way to do it.
Yeah. No fruit?
I eat a banana a day. I don't know if
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
even got anything fiber-wise, but I'm not a huge fruit person, to be
Got it.
honest.
Yeah. Yeah. I did something similar to you where for me, it's not bread, it's rice because I
Yeah.
also grew up eating rice. And I just convinced myself that because I'm Asian and I grew up eating white rice, that it doesn't affect me as like it would another person, which is definitely not true. But I found this like this other rice packet that you could just kind of throw in with your white rice that just adds a bunch of fiber to it. My wife actually found it, and we'll throw it in there. It turns the rice purple, but it still tastes the same. But it
Oh,
definitely
interesting.
adds a bunch of fiber too. So I'm not
What's it
just.
called?
I'll send it to you. I can't remember, but it's like 1.5 scoops of white rice and half a scoop of that, and the rice comes out purple. So our daughter thinks it's cool because it's purple rice and it's
Yeah,
colorful. But yeah, because I was like, I'm always gonna eat rice. That's just gonna be a staple.
yeah. And I do think ancestral diets are really important. Like for me, that was a really big portal into eating healthier and doing it in a way
Yeah,
that tasted good for me. I do think, it's tough to be super prescriptive just because people have so many different tastes.
yeah,
But people ate a lot of fiber 300 years ago.
yeah.
Like we weren't processing stuff and
No,
it definitely came from somewhere. And so I think if we do stick with our what our, grandparents
yeah,
uh were raised on, there's a good chance that that's going to be vastly superior
yeah.
to modern diets.
What was interesting when I first reached out to you is that I thought we would talk about physical health the whole podcast, and then when we chatted, you kind of started mentioning what you do and what you're interested in, which is men's work or manhood or more of emotional intelligence or the mental health aspects of that, obviously paired with the physical health. And you mentioned this concept around a protocol daddy. What is that? What's your definition? And what led you to coin that term?
Yeah. So it did start out with me for physical health and I'm,
Yeah.
looking at these podcasts and I'm on YouTube and Spotify and whatnot, and I'm basically getting a lot of information about how to live from a specific set of dudes. And I realized like there are this class of dudes, usually Gen X. So we're talking like mid 40s into 50s, dudes who are telling me, millennials and Gen Z, how to live. Huberman is probably like king of the protocol daddies. And he uses the word protocol. He says, here are the
Yes.
protocols to live by.
Yeah.
And they work and they're great. And so he's I think the most popular of this crew of people. But but I mean Tim Ferriss has, the things that he's into and the protocols that he is, evangelizes. You've got uh Joe Rogan, you've got Charlemagne the God, who's, doing a lot on the mental health front. And so they're all kind of in a similar age. They're all, you know, giving very helpful information. And it's a very new phenomenon because it's useful information paired with a very intimate knowledge of who this person is. I mean, I'm spending hours a week thinking about this guy and
Yeah.
like absorbing whatever information he gives me. And I'm
It,
understanding over time his preferences and his lifestyle and it's a whole identity that I'm absorbing. And so I just think it's a huge deal. I don't think presidents have as much power as some of these protocol daddies do when it comes to actually saying, here's a lifestyle, here's an identity, go forth and try it out. And people are doing it and it's changing their lives.
yeah, I totally agree. I know when I would click on some of those on YouTube and I didn't really like what the person was saying, I would always have to make sure that I never clicked on another video from that person because I didn't want my feed to get infiltrated.
Yeah.
But
I mean, because it
just
works both ways. Yeah, it's good and bad
yeah,
protocols.
yeah, what
Uh,
we could talk about that is I know Brian Johnson and then there's Brian Johnson, right? So there. So what are your thoughts on those protocol daddies?
it's funny
And
that they have the same name.
yeah,
Uh, but yeah, so we've got Brian Johnson who's trying to become immortal and, made a lot of money, uh, selling selling
but
in tech.
I think he sold Braintree
Yeah,
to PayPal for a lot. I don't even remember what the amount was, but I
right.
mean the guy is probably has like hundreds of millions of dollars in his bank account.
Yeah,
I would
and
guess. Yeah.
spends, 2 to 3 million a year, making himself an 18-year-old. And
The, the funny thing about that is he read an article about LeBron spending that much money on his body every year. So he read that and he's like, huh. Then he started thinking, he was like, "Well, if I had to spend $2 million on my body every year, what would that look like?" And I guess he landed on lowering his biological age to that of an 18-year-old and running every single test to get there.
I didn't know that origin
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, out competing LeBron on spending money on your investing in oneself.
Yeah.
So I think like a part of me is all about what he's doing because I think it's a very, it's scary to put yourself out there and really publicly say, here are my biomarkers, here's what I'm doing, here's what's working and not working, and this can further science. Because the frontier of longevity is a lot of anecdotal evidence. You do have to trial and error yourself into what works for oneself, once you really start getting into that bleeding edge. And so that's really cool. At the same time, it's a lot of naked photo shoots. Like this is not purely about the science. And I just think that there's something else going on there that is
Yeah.
that's not just being young, but being really young, 18 years old. And 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 just the fact that like I see him shirtless more than anyone else on the internet, and his wardrobe went from like dorky Silicon Valley guy to like this oatmeal futurism, uh, The Matrix, but natural colors type of thing. And there's something else going on. Yeah, I don't know
No,
what
I
it
mean,
is. I don't necessarily like it though, and so uh, I want to learn, but I don't want to be sucked into that universe.
I think what he's doing is pretty cool. If you spend that much money on yourself to further research for longevity, can only be a good thing. But I find what he's doing so extreme. Like if he had a protocol, I know there are people that follow it, but for me, there's no way I'm doing any of this stuff. It's just too intense.
Yeah.
But I guess a good juxtaposition to him would be the other Brian Johnson, who is also shirtless and always in my feed. There's a point, I guess, when he was at his peak that he was like all over the internet. Like his
Oh,
physique
Liver
and
King crushed it.
yeah,
Yeah.
he did.
Yeah.
So, what are your thoughts on Liver King?
I You know what? I honestly think Liver King might be a health like more I like him more than the other Brian Johnson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I looked at both. I was like, "Oh, is there a good one and a bad one? Is there a good protocol diet or a bad one?" And obviously, he got busted for taking steroids to get his physique. But
Yeah.
kind of curious, like, why do you like the Liver King a lot more than the other Brian Johnson?
So the Liver King's faults are so obvious. Like he lied about taking steroids
True.
again and again and again. And then he finally got busted, caught red-handed. And so, the cat's out of the bag on that one. His content is way over the top. It's him, like dragging hundreds of pounds of weights like in the middle of New York City, and he wears like a Viking hat, and it's so ridiculous that there's no part of me that at all wants to copy what he does. And like he involves his like family in a lot of photo shoots, and they're just like they're not coming with the same gusto energy that he is, and sometimes that can be awkward too, which I find hilarious.
Yeah.
But he's got these 9 ancestral tenets of how to live, and it's stuff like, um, like prioritize family and connection, prioritize, eating right and grounding and sunlight. And these are the exact same things that, Huberman is speaking about from a scientific angle. And so I, I don't think anyone should copy
I
him.
think
I don't think he's been an honest person. And if the cat was not out of the bag on the steroids front, I wouldn't say his name out loud because I wouldn't wanna popularize him, but because that's happened, I think, uh,
yeah.
his advice can be taken with a grain of salt, and I think it's actually good advice in terms of the stuff that he's saying other people should
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it sounds like he had good advice. He hacked the algorithms or social media algorithms to become very popular.
Yeah.
I also read that he sold all these supplements or, that were very, because I guess it was the Liver King because he would just eat weird shit to get strong, I guess, but it was really steroids.
Yeah, it's
But
on a stero but, like exactly, he's eating
yeah,
steroids, that's why he's spending, like, what, $10,000 a month on steroids,
yeah,
and saying
um,
liver is the reason why he looks like that. But
yeah,
at the same time, liver is incredible. Like, we should all be
yeah,
eating liver because it's the most nutrient dense meat out there.
yeah.
And I started eating liver as a result of that. And so, like,
There is, in my opinion, I guess there is a bad version of this, which is the things they're saying are very bad. and they also hack the algorithm to become very popular. I think Andrew Tate would probably be a good example of that. I mean,
Yeah, he's the poster child of that for sure.
he's the poster child. I think he became really famous really fast. People are like, where did this guy come from? And you think about him is he will say things that people don't disagree with, like work hard and
Mhm.
or the gym. And once you start, I feel like that's his hook. And then once you kind of are young and you hear that, then he pulls you into different layers. And the deeper you go in those layers, the weirder it gets. And then
Yeah,
you fit in
or I
sometimes.
would say for a lot of young dudes, because I mean, his market, it's a lot of teenagers, can
Yeah.
be the opposite, where he's pulling people in by saying outrageous things, misogynistic, and they click on it, and then they see advice that they're finding useful, and that's what gets them to stay. And so I think that is, it's a dangerous one too. It's definitely affecting young men. Um, I think his power comes from his ability. He's one of the few people speaking to young men's shame directly. And, there's a lot of protocol daddies out there. A lot of them have advice on productivity, advice on health. None of them are like, you're an 18-year-old and you feel like shit, and I have a solution for you. And he does that. And so I think it's not advice I stand by. But I think the the target, his directness on who he's
Yeah.
speaking to needs to be copied by other people because he's filling a void that no one else is.
What shame do you think he's capitalizing on for young men?
So it's, in my opinion, a lot of young men do not feel free. They feel like they are trapped by, whatever like lack of a job. They didn't graduate. They're, emotionally, they feel like children because, they're addicted to social media. And so this feeling of like, basically, I want my balls back, is huge among young men and old men. But I think because of social media and just this like feedback loop of opinion, I think it's especially prevalent among young men. I mean, the stats are depressing as hell regarding young men and depression and dropping out of school and suicidal ideation. And so I think it's just a lot of shame about not being strong enough or the man they want to be or action oriented, and that becomes a paralyzing emotion that they need someone else to shake them up for.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think I also read that you said porn was like a huge factor for shame for a
Huge.
lot of young men too.
Yeah. And so, like, this gets into the territory of like, there are some things I think, uh, the right is focused on that, while I disagree with a lot of, political opinions on this front, the focus on porn and that being a major issue, is spot on. And the reason I think that is I do a lot of men's work. I work with a men's group called All Kings, based here in New York City, and we serve formerly incarcerated men. It's got 50-50 formerly incarcerated, non-formerly incarcerated, and incredible group. We do retreats and weekly circles, and really get to know each other's deepest shames. And so I've been doing this for 4 years now, very regularly, and I've talked to hundreds of dudes about what is it that is giving you shame and giving me shame. What's your relationship with porn, with sexual health? And I can count on one hand the number of men aged 18 to 80 years old who think that their relation with porn is healthy. And so, like, whether porn is causing X, Y, and Z issues, the science is not, definitive. But what I do know is that porn is causing shame and people are not happy with their relationship with it. And, it's a powerful activity. It releases, all these chemicals in
Mhm.
the brain, and we, a lot of dudes doing it multiple times a week or every day, and it's got to be affecting us on on all kinds of subconscious levels. And and if I were to say like what's the one word that is most common for young men and middle-aged men, that causes shame, if I only got one word, to figure out what most people have shame on, it's porn.
Yeah, now hearing what you're saying about protocol daddies and the rise of people like Andrew Tate that can capitalize on shame or anger that a lot of young men are feeling, it kind of makes sense to make these outlandish, very polarizing, very extreme points of view just to kind of hook them in. So when you hear that in your men's group, what do people do about it, or how do they respond? Or is it more about just saying out in the open and just getting it off your chest?
Yeah, I mean, so this gets at the heart of, like, what men's work is and what
Mhm.
happens during men's groups, which is we do not give advice. We do not emotionally rescue people by saying, like, "Oh, I'm sorry," or, "Oh, you're actually a great person. Don't worry about that." People speak their truth, and we let them sit in it. And so if I say, I'm today, I just got a lot of shame, my relationship with porn is getting out of control. Uh, I Someone might ask me clarifying questions to help me get deeper and deeper into the emotion of that shame, but they're never going to say, "Here's what you should do about it."
Got it.
They at best they'll ask me, "What do I want to do about it?" And to me, that's a very powerful combination because if it's coming from me, if that action is coming, if what I want to do about it is coming from me as opposed to someone else, I'm going to remember it. It's something that I can't bullshit my way out of, and so uh, that's what I think men's group, the efficacy of men's group, relies on, and I think it's a really powerful model for behavior change as a result.
I think that's pretty powerful. And I'm speaking from my own personal experience is you, I don't know why I do this, but it's to give advice, just kind of, I don't know if it's like in our nature or we are the recipient of people just giving us advice all the time.
Yeah,
So it's like give advice, but don't share how you're feeling is I would say the old like quote unquote protocol.
yeah.
I guess there's a new one that's probably healthier, which is share what you're feeling. Don't give advice.
It's funny. I never thought about it in that like
Yeah.
1-2 punch kind of way, but you're totally right. I think it's the new paradigm, the flipping that paradigm is the way to go.
It reminds me of this, I guess I wouldn't even say it's funny, but it reminds me of this memory that I have, which is I obviously grew up on the internet like everyone else. I'm a little bit older than everyone, but I grew up on the internet. And I remember I was like clicking through and I don't even really love Snoop Dogg, but I love watching any clips that he has. And I think it was like right after he had this Netflix show where he was like the coach of a Pee Wee football team. And I thought it was a pretty good show. So I was like really into Snoop Dogg. And I saw this clip where he said, and this was maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, so it wasn't even a popular theme, and even saying this out loud seems like it's super archaic, but he's like, "Dude, it's okay to cry. Like, I cry all the time. I used to not cry, and I would hold it in, and I would get angry, and I just realized that it's okay to cry." And he was saying this in front of, like, I think it might have been like a barbershop or there, like a podcast interview. And that's the first time I actually heard anyone say that. I mean, I've heard people say, "Oh, it's okay to cry," but I was like, "Whoa, this guy that I thought was like super tough is saying that it's okay to cry," and then kind of changed the way I thought about it, which
Yeah,
was
I had a
yeah,
very similar experience. It was is it Snoop Dogg? Was that the guy you're talking about?
yeah, yeah. So, and then I
So
started crying all the time after that.
like, I think this is why it's important to find, like, role models and tough guys, as a dude,
Yeah, yeah.
and, and seek their vulnerability, because for me, I watched this documentary called The Work. This is how I got into men's work. It follows guys in Folsom Prison. They're doing men's work, every single week, hours at a time, and they become really good. I mean, they are the masters of facilitation for dude therapy, basically. And and I'm watching this documentary, and it's a bunch of dudes they're in a maximum security prison. They are 1,000 times tougher than me. They've seen or committed violent things, and they're crying their balls off. They're just bawling and really going deep into whatever traumas have triggered, a life of emotions for them. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, if these guys are crying, what's my excuse? Like, am I tougher than these guys? Absolutely not. And if they're messaging to me over this documentary that, like, this is making them feel more human, then this is some medicine for me too. And so, yeah, I like find a tough guy who cries, and
Well,
I think that's valuable.
yeah, because I think the archetype was be super tough, super aggressive, and feel like I couldn't really relate to it. But that got me thinking through what would be the right male archetype or protocol daddy for today, knowing where society is going, how much it's evolved and changed, and in good and bad ways. But if we had to like think through, like, what would that person look like? Does it exist today? Is it, depends on the, where you are in the spectrum for, whatever the different
Mhm.
axes are. Like, how would you like answer that question?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, one of the spiciest questions today,
Yeah,
because I don't have any answers, but I think about it a
yeah,
lot, and, uh, so here's my thoughts. I think like, the male archetype it changes at a snail's pace. Like, the idea of what a successful woman looks like has changed generation after generation. Feminism has really done a number on,
yeah.
changing the conceptions of what it means to be successful. For men, we've had James Bond for 50 years, and you could, like, wanna be slutty resort James Bond or assassin James Bond or, like, suave casino James Bond, but you're still gonna want to be James Bond. And even the attire of what that looks like hasn't really changed. And so, like, what today is the role model for men? I think it's, the same thing it looked like in 1965. I I am trying to think these days about, like, what does it look like 50 years from now? And is that gonna still be James Bond? And maybe, yeah, but I think it's interesting. It's fun to think that it could be different. And I'm curious to hear from you, like, what you see. Like, do you have any role models now that you think are changing the way you think about your own manhood?
That's a good question. I mean, I do think the role models out there have changed, but I think the traits attached to them haven't, right? So like with technology, there's the rise of the nerd.
Mhm.
There's Mark Zuckerberg who turned down $1 billion. Look how bold he is. There's Steve Jobs who invented the iPhone. There's Elon Musk. He's like autistic, but look, he's like the richest man in the world. But they're like, assholes or, they had to do cutthroat things or whatever. But
The
those
tech
traits
asshole is a strong archetype, yeah.
it's a very strong archetype and it's praised. And then you see the protocol daddies and there's different flavors of that. I don't know. I think maybe a different way to think about this would be what type of person do I want to be? Like,
Mhm.
what type of man do I want to be? What are the values that I want to uphold? And I guess that's maybe a different way to think about it because out of that, maybe there will be a different role model that evolves out of that, especially now because we have the internet. So James Bond era is very, production top down and the internet could be bottom up. But maybe that's a question for you. What type of person are, what are the traits or values that you try to live day by day? And with a lot of the work that you do, what are the commonalities between everyone that would be deemed successful, a healthy version of what they're trying to become?
Yeah, I think, for me, I do split it between the personal front and the professional front in terms of what I want. And I think on the professional front, it has changed over the last couple of years. Like, I used to want to run a big tech company, and I was in tech for 8 years, and the goal was to raise a bunch of money and, you know, exit $1 billion+ company. And that was, I think, the cultural playbook that a lot of folks aspire to in tech. I'm here in New York City. And now it's shifting more towards owning my own time, which I also see as a major shift culturally right now. I would credit Tim Ferriss for really kickstarting a lot of um, that thought. And so professionally, I want to make money and I want it to provide for the kind of lifestyle I want to live. I think my first million podcast with Sam Parr and Sean Purry, like they they talk about that every single episode all day long. And so I think that that's their source of inspiration for that, um, in terms of how to do that. But I think personally, I think is where the edge is for me, and that is a bigger question mark for me. I don't know. of like a single person that I can say that person shows up how I want to show up in any given situation. And for me, I think the goal of emotional intelligence, the goal for the kind of man I want to be is I show up how I want to show up in every given moment. I feel as deeply as I want and need to feel, whether that's anger or sadness or shame or happiness, etc. And use those emotions to, you know, push things forward for me. And so there aren't a lot of dudes who deeply feel on the full spectrum of feeling, publicly at least. And so I don't think there are role models that are super obvious for me, at least on that front. Um,
Yeah.
I do think like religious icons tend to have more of that emotional breadth than your average movie star. Um, there's just, whether you're talking about like Jesus or Buddha or Muhammad, there's just like a lot of emoting going on uh, that I think is really interesting to look back on and view as a role model.
Yeah.
But today, not so much.
Yeah. I think when you hearing that and thinking through like what would be a good role model or what I would want to achieve as a human being, I think the words like alpha and beta come to mind
Yeah.
when we grow up, and you got to be this alpha male, and if you're beta male, you're just beta. Who wants to be a beta male? And I think that it was like kind of reinforced culturally. I
Hmm.
think for me, being mixed with being an Asian American male that grew up, and I was born in the 80s and pre all the stuff that's happening now, but with society and popular culture, like Asian men are very demasculinized.
Hmm.
So I had those two things going. I feel like I had to overcompensate by working hard and all the things attached to that. I would say today, now that I'm a little bit older, for me, my answer would be balance. So showing that I can achieve what I would want to achieve at work, not go too far into it, have a great relationship with my family and my wife and be a good dad, have strong friends that I could be there for, give back to my community, live in good health, and just try to have a balance between all those things and show that is something that can be sought after or
Out of
it's
all
a
those things, I'm curious for
yeah.
you. What are you struggling with the most? What's your edge?
So I think what I'm working on, which is that, once I heard you say that, or I was like, okay, that is a great framing where you show up and you can be the best version of yourself. You're never going to be perfect, but having both the physical and the mental and the emotional awareness and intelligence to have all those things in sync is a great goal to have. What are your thoughts? The thing as I read through a lot of your articles, and the two things that kind of stood out to me was your thoughts on self-respect and living a life of service. And I'm kind of curious to hear, like, how did you land on those two things? What does it mean? I mean, it
Hmm.
really stood out to me as like, man, those are two things I definitely want to do. I want to add that to my toolkit. I want to make that part of my day to day. I want to make sure that I live that as to my fullest ability into all those buckets that I just kind of described. Like, how'd you land on that, and
Hmm.
what does it mean?
So, so I've consumed a lot of books and a lot of just content on like how to be a man. And there's one book that I think is the template for a lot of modern takes on how to be a dude coming out from influencers. And that is David Data's book, The Way of the Superior Man.
Yeah.
And in that book is just a laundry list of rules, a couple dozen, about like how to show up in a relationship, how to stand up for oneself. It's very like, be comfortable with confrontation, be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and uh and step into it. He there's a lot in that book, but I would say self-respect is absolutely core to his conception of like the superior man. And so uh that message I think is taken and reformatted in 1,000 different ways by a lot of online influencers right now. Andrew Tate among them. Like stand up for yourself. Jordan Peterson, sit up straight. Um, take care of yourself. Clean your bed, and have that be the first step to becoming the man you want to. There's there's one thing that lacks though, which is like, what's the point of it all? Like, what am I here for? I don't really care at the end of the day to be a superior man. I don't want to be better than everyone else because a million dudes trying to be better than everyone else sounds like misery. And then we can get into like, you know, the whole concept of the patriarchy. Basically, a lot of dudes being mad at each other for being dudes, it has created a world of pain, and that shtick has not worked out the last couple thousand
Yeah.
years, at least.
Yeah.
And and so, is there a healthier goal in mind besides being superior that enables us to live in relationship with each other and that fills us with energy and love? And to me, that's living a life of service. And every religious leader that I'm aware of, including other icons like Einstein, Mahatma Gandhi, etc. They all stress service, and service is ironically the thing that I see lacking in the current discourse around how to be a man. And so uh, they're not like self-respect and living a life of service are not necessarily masculine things,
Yeah.
uh, but I do think the way we interpret it are like there's way self-respect looks different for a guy than it does a woman. Service can look a lot different for a guy than it does a woman. And I think we have to think about what that looks like for ourselves in order to feel complete and not just be involved in a rat race.
What would that look like or how does that look like to you today when you kind of do a lot of your work? Or
Yeah, I mean, I for one, I think creating a life mission, while sounding corny as hell, is really important for like for each person understanding themselves. Again, in men's work, we do that. Everyone creates a life mission, write it down. For me, it's in my bedroom, written on the wall. I can see it every day. And and for me, for example, I want to give people a sense of control over their lives. That's my mission, and I do that through active listening and doing the damn thing. Which that mission doesn't sound inspiring to most people, but I know exactly what that means for myself, and I
Mhm.
know exactly what kinds of actions I need to take to fulfill that, and that I think is the key to having a good mission. Is like it means a lot to me. It doesn't mean a lot to other people. It's not flashy. It's not whatever. It's just very clear. And so, so yeah, I do men's work. That's how I serve people besides myself. But it's a mutual give and take because you can't serve other people without serving yourself in a healthy way too. I encourage everyone to, yeah, just find like whatever deep insecurity they have and like whatever mom and dad stuff you're carrying, turn that into a life mission. And the idea behind that is you're best able to give what you want for yourself the most. So, if I want control over my own life because I, for whatever reason, didn't feel I had that growing up, that's the gift I have for everyone else. For the rest of my life, I can give that better than just about anything else because I know exactly what that feels like. And running an exercise like that for oneself, I think, is really powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful. Um, One quote that you wrote about that I really liked, which is before men's work, if you asked me to envision what a super masculine dude devoted to emotional safety and healing looked like, my brain would short circuit. I was like, oh, yeah. And it sounds like you're doing a lot of that work. And I was kind of curious, like, what does that work look like outside of, the retreats and the weekly circles? Like, what
Hmm.
are the toolkits? What are like, how does one create emotional safety? How does one communicate well? How does one express their emotions? What does that healing look like? And I don't want to ask it just for men because I think a lot of the things probably it's applicable to everyone.
Hmm.
Like, what is in that toolkit?
Yeah. So I think there's the goal for me at least is to be in control of my own energy and share that and be an effective leader like in a room.
Hmm.
Understand what the energy is and enact accordingly. Change it if it needs to be changed. So the first step for that is a lot of emotional self-awareness on my front. I have to understand where I'm at, where I'm coming from. And and there's a lot of tools to do that. I think one that comes to mind is every single meeting that we have in men's work, we check in with how we're feeling. And it's not a story. It's not this happened and this happened and this happened. It's just I get 5 emotions to choose from: happy, mad, sad, fear, shame. And I choose one of them. I maybe add a sentence about why I'm feeling that way. So like, I'm feeling fear because this is my first podcast and I don't want to screw it up. And that's it. And so I start getting really clear about how am I actually doing, and like what are the patterns of where those emotions are coming from. And uh and you know, beyond that, there's that more kind of 30,000-foot level toolbox item of what are my insecurities? Like we all have mom and dad issues. We all picked up
Yeah.
insecurities when we were growing up.
Yeah.
What are they? What and so this is an exercise that Tony Robbins popularized, but he calls it the primary question. And I love this framing because it's basically what is the question I ask myself the most often? There can only be one that I ask myself the most often, and chances are it's based on some insecurity I picked up, when I was 8 years old, and it's low key stressing me out all day. And for me, at least, it's how do I make you happy? But for everyone, it's a little different. I've heard people say, am I right? Am I safe? Do you like me? There's a lot of these types of questions that if I'm interacting with somebody, that's happening in the back of my head, whether I like it or not. I have no control, instinctually about whether that question gets asked. I'm just thinking it. And if if I can understand that question, now I understand that that's probably the limiting belief that is getting in the way of how I actually want to act in a situation. If I am focused on how to make you happy, Michael, and because you're pissed off at me, and my brain, it can only think about like, okay, how do I make Michael happy and not how do I actually solve this issue or just take care of the problem, then uh then I'm not actually solving the problem. I'm just, dealing with some surface level issue here. And so as soon as I understand that, I can start to rewrite what that question I should be asking is. And over time, as I become sensitive to it, I can react and gain control of that insecurity or that emotion. Eventually, I think, this goes back to creating a life mission. If I know that's my insecurity, I know I'm really sensitive and I'm really good at percepting if people are not happy. Maybe that's the source of a gift I have for the rest of the world. And I think this goes back to like these tech guys being assholes. They all have daddy issues. Someone, like there's a lot of abuse, just straight up physical abuse and mental abuse for the most successful people in the world. There's something about wanting to be great and wanting to be worthy, and this is how they're going to prove it. And that's the gift they're giving everyone else. Sometimes it comes out sideways and, they become violent themselves. But understanding that can be a huge asset. I'm curious for you. Uh, yeah, when it comes to like naming emotions, uh, what, yeah, do you find that that's a difficult thing, or do you find that certain emotions are difficult for you?
No, I think, oh, yes, and it's something I've been working on, and being able to kind of do what you just said and label it and just describe why, and not go into this full blown out explanation and just letting it sit. Like, feeling it and not reacting to it and understanding that it's a pattern, uh, for sure. I think when I think about my question or my insecurity, um, I never really thought about it. I would say the first thing that comes to mind would be, am I being heard?
Mm,
Which is kind of interesting because I'm starting this podcast,
yeah. Well, there you go. Is he
Yeah, it's
connected?
like,
Probably.
am I being listened to? Am I sounding, like I would say to you, like I feel like fear because I don't want to sound dumb.
Here's how you know if
Yeah.
that if that is the primary question. So, if it's, "Am I being heard for you?" If you can connect it to some memories growing up where you really did not feel that you were being heard, and if you feel that, if you don't ask that question, if you're not heard, bad things happen. Like, there has to be some pretty severe consequences to,
Mm.
uh to that question not going right. Then you know you've got a primary question on your hands.
Yeah, I have to think through that. But it does sound like it checks off a lot of the boxes. It's pretty interesting that I've focused a lot of my time and energy today on creating a podcast and a platform to share an opinion that I have with the world. So that's why it was like the first question that popped up. I do have a lot of memories of not feeling like I was heard or not even be able to speak. So it makes sense now that I would do the polar opposite, which is sitting in this room in front of a microphone
Mhm,
to
mhm.
speak or chat with other people to share their opinions and perspectives. So I think it does check off a lot of boxes. I'll have to think through like the negative consequence of not speaking up or feeling heard. I have to think that a little bit more, but I'm pretty sure when I go to therapy, I will
Yeah,
uncover some examples.
there's some juice there. You got something to
Yeah.
work with.
So, yeah. What are your thoughts on therapy? Because I know physical health, it's like there's so many protocols with
Mhm.
mental health. I know a lot of people online or that I've read talk about therapy not being that effective. I found it to be effective in some ways for myself, but I wish there were other things I could do on that journey. Like, what are your thoughts on therapy, healing, and if that's even the right word, or different things that a person could do to improve, you know, that
Yeah.
side of their life?
So I think, the mental health toolbox that we've got in terms of, like, what are the popular items that I can grasp onto if I'm not feeling good or I just wanna improve my mental well-being, emotional intelligence, etcetera. Therapy is incredibly powerful. Uh, it's one-on-one from a trained person how to, get rid of some pretty nasty patterns, which is
Yes.
great.
Yeah.
That being said, I think it's just the way our entire health system is set up. It's focused on, "Here's a problem, and I'm gonna get you to base level. I'm gonna, diagnose you with depression or anxiety, and what we're gonna work on is solving your depression and anxiety." And other toolbox items for mental health, such as, pills or even meditation, now psychedelics, I think have a similar, at least how they're marketed, it's similar. It's, meditate for your depression and anxiety, take a pill for this or that. And what I see a gap in, as we're all trying to evolve and, you know, be closer as humans to each other, is what are the actual skills that I can build? What are the toolbox items I can work on to get strong, not just okay? Uh, and that's a question mark. Like, where do I turn to if I want to be really good at uh, emotional self awareness, at connecting with other people, etc.? And I do think of emotional intelligence or mental health as more akin to a gym than and like going there and training and putting my reps in on that front as a way to get better, as opposed to, fixing something that's broken and now I can go about my business.
That's so interesting because, I would see people that are charismatic or, have those skills, and the assumption would be, oh, they're just born like that. That just comes natural to them. But I guess like all things in life, it's a skill that you can learn. Like starting a company is a skill, managing, leading is a skill that you could develop. Obviously, some people have a higher aptitude or might pick it up faster, but it's definitely a skill. I never thought about that I guess, through the lens of the emotional intelligence side. I mean, I guess I have been working on that, throughout my career and today.
But yeah,
But I
there's a general lack of, I would say, targeted education on this front.
yeah, I wish there was like a life school. Like my dream would be in a
Mhm.
world where you go to high school, it is what it is. Most people, they want to go to college, they could go there. Maybe there's a gap year or summer program where you go. It's like, here are the life skills, like practical things. This is how to manage your finances and pay your taxes. This is, how to find the right partner. And this is how to like develop a great physical health habit. And here's some mental health and emotional intelligence things you can learn.
Yeah.
So you can like emerge out of that school as like a well-rounded individual.
Well, I think what's exciting right now is that, like, those protocols are not in like, they're new. We're figuring that out,
Yeah.
I think, right now. Um, I've done a lot of research on where to find exercises, protocols,
Yeah.
things that I can help improve my ability to just, like, simply feel or, uh, be in a tough conversation, and what I find is that there's a lot of workshops that do speak to this stuff, but there's a lot of bullshit. There's 70% like bullshit workshops that won't teach you a thing. 30% fantastic. Um, or in a single workshop, I might throw away 80% of what I hear, but find one or two things that I like. And a lot of it's tied to spirituality. And so, as
Yeah.
someone who's just like not a new age inclined person, there's
Thing.
that's a big turnoff. Like I don't want to sit in front of someone talk about how I can show up better in front of their whatever conception of God they have. But they might have some really useful tips, and I absolutely have used them. And so um it's I don't think we have cleanly separated out these really useful emotional intelligence protocols from what works and what doesn't, and from the spirituality stuff as well. But I think that's happening right now in real time.
Yeah. So it sounds like they're these protocol daddies that will talk about how to make money. They'll like how to live
Health and
life to the full
productivity.
and
That's
productivity and make money.
yeah.
Yeah. Or health. And now I guess health, wealth.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess if there was a third bucket around emotional intelligence or mental health or however you want to describe the bucket, what would be like a protocol that you would, like what would be a good example
Yeah.
of one?
So my favorite just baseline protocol that is for me foundational to all the others. It's called active listening. And it's basically just how to listen to somebody and be there for them and sit in whatever they are feeling. And so active listening is doing one of three things. One, shutting up, being silent, just listening. Two is echoing the exact words that they say, not paraphrasing, just
Mm.
echoing their words, which means paying attention to those. And then three is asking clarifying questions. And so if someone is telling me about, how tough of a day they've had, I am doing one of those three things. I'm not giving advice. I'm not saying it's not going to be that bad. You're a great person, whatever. I'm just saying I'm staying in silence. I'm echoing or I'm asking clarifying questions. And every time I have done that, I have a conversation that goes way deeper and is way more emotionally impactful and intimate than anything else I could have done.
Yeah, and I think that's also something I've been working on myself. And I think like what I've noticed is getting to a place where you really understand what the person's saying. So I think I would repeat what they were saying because it was literally like this formulaic playbook.
Mhm.
But I would think the secret was when I really truly understand what they're saying and they feel like I really understand what they're saying and
Yeah.
doing it without judgment. Cause sometimes I'm human. I would disagree with what you're saying. And the defensive version of that would be counter arguing them, dismissing it, etc., and trying to prove your point. But then when you listen deeply and the other person feels like you really understand them, I found that like it leads to better, deeper conversation, but it also can reduce like a lot of conflict. 'Cause, like a lot of conflicts are just loops
Mhm.
where one person's saying another thing, another person's ping ponging back and forth. And I think active listening can, prevent a lot of things from even starting.
Yeah, I agree. I mean,
Yeah.
I
I think a
think
lot of conflict is probably just one or both sides feeling like they're being misunderstood. So it could be a work thing. It's like, "Hey, I have this idea," but if, your coworker's not listening to you, it's like, "Okay, this person's not do they think it's a bad idea? Do they not think I'm smart?" Or, maybe those questions are popping up in your head.
oh, yeah, I mean, the judgments
Yeah.
start flying.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So it's really hard to do though on, like, every single day, every
I
single
screwed up
moment.
all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
well, a buddy of mine literally this week, was going through a breakup, and he's telling me about it, and I immediately start going into, like, you know, "You're great," "Don't worry about it,"
Yeah.
like, "We're gonna get back out there,"
Yeah.
and I caught myself, I was like, "This is not helping anybody,"
No.
and
Yeah.
and he's sitting there like, "I'm just sad, like, I'm I just wanna
Yeah.
be sad," and that's exactly, I think, the challenge is when someone is feeling some type of way, I want
Yeah.
them to feel normal,
Yeah.
but I think the healthiest thing for a lot of folks is to go deeper in the emotion, to
Yeah.
to if I'm, sad and I'm here, like, how do I just ratchet that up so I can fully experience it, and then that enables me to get past it, or at least,
Yeah.
feel like I'm on the other side of whatever I was feeling.
Yeah. This reminds me of the rules that you guys have in the men's group. I will make I statements versus you, and I will not give advice to another man unless he explicitly asks for it.
Oh, that
I will
first one,
not.
like,
Yeah.
telling
Yeah.
stories, just saying "I" or talking
Yeah.
"I" instead of "you," so difficult. I mean, that
Yeah.
really requires some brain rewiring
Yeah. Or I
'cause
guess this one, which is I will not emotionally rescue another man. For me, if I'm feeling down, the last thing I want to hear is like, "Hey, we're gonna go back out there and we're gonna try again." It's like, dude, let me, I just want to like
yeah,
wallow for an hour and
let me
then I'll
feel
pick
like
my up.
shit, yeah.
Yeah, let me feel like shit. I don't need to be picked up right now. So it's really hard to do those things, but I do think that goes back to showing up every day and trying your best.
Mhm. And eventually it's a liberating feeling of like, I don't need to do anything. I
Yeah.
just, you know, s- being silent, echoing, asking questions is not difficult. It's not brain science when it comes to really, you know, being there for someone. Um, it's just our own, emotions getting in the way.
Yeah. So circling back on the question we've been talking about is like, what is the right archetype?
Hmm.
And I think I would add it, is becoming a little bit clearer for me. I would add a third one, which is something that you've spoken about before, which I think for me is the answer is like a man feeling emotionally secure
Hmm.
and, maybe having the physical side, having, like let's say health and wealth are important. I would say the third one is being very emotionally secure. It feels like the combination of those three things would be a very well-rounded individual, or at least in whatever definition you have. I think having those skills, um, I think is pretty important.
Yeah. I mean, maybe we just found out the new man of
Yeah.
2023. Yeah, health, wealth,
Yeah.
and emotionally secure.
Yeah. So if I could see there's like a new version of like Andrew Huberman coming out, it's like, I'm a scientist. I've done so much research into emotional intelligence, not just for men, but just for everyone. And it's like, dude, the playbook is there of how to become very famous doing these things. I
Mhm.
mean, probably like a positive and I guess a negative way of doing it, but
It's
so
funny you mentioned Huberman. I think this is exactly what he's doing right now. In the last
yeah,
2 months have been nothing but emotional intelligence podcasts. But here's the catch is, I mean, they're broadly about the science of emotions, and some of them are more practical than others, but there's very few protocols about what to actually do about it. It's
yeah,
like mental frameworks, but without the action items. And so I think this is still the frontier of mental
yeah.
health, and in new archetypes for men is figuring that stuff out.
Yeah, and I think it feels like there's something bubbling there because there's the rise of psychedelics. There's a rise of people looking for alternatives to therapy. I think a lot of people are talking about it. A lot of people are thinking about it. It's
Mhm.
becoming a lot more accepted. Where the Marlboro Man or James Bond is like, it's like it was the archetype, but it's just so unrelatable today. So hopefully there will be more archetypes that evolve and hopefully we'll see some more his positive associations with all these other things that have been frowned down
Yeah.
upon from just like society around how to be a man.
And I think like coming back to James Bond, like the fantasy of James Bond is very clear. Like that vision of his lifestyle of being extremely capable, living a life of luxury. We can all picture it in our head. What is the fantasy of being emotionally secure, of being able to feel all the feelings and showing up how we want to show up? That is not clear. I think that's the work for creating a new archetype is helping someone like me understand what that looks like so then I can step into it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it sounds like there are some tactical things that need to happen around how to do these things. And I'm sure that a lot of those things do exist. Like, there have been books written about active listening, but I do think those books are fairly new, like past decades, not, you know, hundreds of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there needs to be new role models. I mean, like if I was like a talent agency, I was like, dude, I think this is gonna be a trend. We need to find the most buff, like, like we need somebody like The Rock that is very in tune with their emotions. Like that is like we can make that person really famous. Like they're gonna talk about their physical health, they're gonna check off all the boxes, they're gonna be extremely wealthy. People are gonna, because that's like what is accepted. And then we're going to add this third thing that's going to make this person really differentiated. And they're going
Yeah.
to just talk about all the emotional intelligence. They're going to talk about how to parent well. They're going to talk about how to have a great marriage. They're
Mhm.
going to talk about how to create your own men's group or friends group where you can go deeper and you don't just talk about sports.
Yeah.
Maybe that, like I could see that kind of popping up. And because I think a lot of people and men especially want, right? I think
Mhm.
there's a craving for it. And I think it's gonna hopefully happen soon.
And I think that the toughest part, the challenge for that is not just talking about the emotions. Like the last 10 years, there are plenty of celebrities who say, I have depression.
Yeah,
And, and they're open about it and it's great and it's a huge step forward. But I think the tough part is showing people what that looks like and showing people what coming out the other side of that emotion looks like. Because that's the frontier of vulnerability. The
yeah,
Rock can say, "I was sad yesterday," but what does that look like for him? And so that when I look like that, I know that there's a path that,
yeah.
is a step beyond it.
Right. I do feel like it's bubbling up just for society in generally, and I think it's just a matter of time before it becomes like a new protocol daddy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, well, here's to the journey, man. We'll see.
yeah.
You
Um,
and me both.
maybe yeah. I guess to wrap up, like who are the top ones that you would recommend that have a healthy dynamic for protocol
For
daddies?
Protocol Daddies, I
Yeah,
mean, Huberman's my man.
yeah,
I can't not, uh listen to him just because I think his selection of who he has on his podcast,
yeah,
um, is he gets the top people, and I know it's never gonna be bullshit, which is a
yeah, yeah,
tough, hurdle to come across in the podcast realm.
yeah,
So, for all things health, and, like, productivity, I think he's a top bet. Peter Attia for straight up fitness is my top guy. Uh, and yeah, for like how to make money on the wealth front, I think My First Million podcast is doing incredible work. I think they're
yeah,
redefining masculinity in a professional context for a lot of young guys, and it's super
yeah,
exciting because it's making money and how it is it and not not that sucking your soul out, and they make it look fun.
yeah,
So that's it. It's nothing special. I'm still if you
yeah.
have any Rex, I'm all ears, and I'm constantly on the hunt for more.
No, I think those are all good ones. Um, I don't listen to too many podcasts, but I do listen to those. But where can people find you online, and where can people like read a lot of the work that you're publishing?
Yeah, thanks. I've got a newsletter called A Man's Work. It's on Substack, and so you can search for that with my name or a man's work, as well as online Zoom course about emotional intelligence. And so all these protocols that we're talking about, it's a space for getting the reps in, for learning how it's done, and then doing it, and building those skills that are foundational to showing up how we want to show up. And so that's at amanswork.com.
Cool. Thanks, Shawnee. This is a great conversation. I really appreciate you jumping on.
Michael, thank you so much. This has been a
Yeah.
blast.